Hey, hello guys, welcome back. So, today we are going to wrap up talking about the Middle, Southern, and Chesapeake colonies by going into Maryland, Carolina, and Georgia. And always, you can follow along at the link in your Google Classroom. It will go to the website. The British colonies in the American South were divided into two regions: the Chesapeake colonies, which included Maryland and Virginia, and the Southern colonies, which included Georgia and the Carolinas. One of the first proprietary colonies, or colonies owned by an individual instead of a joint stock company, was the Chesapeake colony of Maryland, granted by Charles I to Sir George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore. Upon his death, the land was left to his son Cecilius Calvert, the second Lord Baltimore, who actually founded the colony. Lord Baltimore's purpose for founding Maryland was similar to the religious motives that drove the Puritans and Quakers to settle in the New World. He sought the colony as a refuge for English Catholics who were subjugated to discrimination in England. So we see a lot of religious liberties still at play in these colonies. They are a lot more tolerant of religion than New England or England across the Atlantic. That's why people came over to the 13 colonies to escape religious persecution, right? In 1634, Baltimore planted the first settlement at St. Mary's, just north of the Potomac on Chesapeake Bay. The charter empowered Baltimore with almost regal authority. He was able to grant huge federal manors, hold people in serfdom, make laws, and develop his own courts. In the beginning, the estate owners were primarily Catholic gentlemen, with Protestants working as the servants. Baltimore soon discovered that to draw more settlers, he also had to offer small farms and give the colonists a say in the government. In 1635, the first legislative assembly met, and in 1650 it divided into two houses, with the governor and his council sitting separately from the lower houses. So we see plots to get people into the lands, giving them free land, having religious tolerance, and what else? Having a power to the people based government, a sort of democracy. In contrast to the northern and middle colonies, the southern and Chesapeake colonies, including Maryland, were predominantly rural settlements. Maryland quickly prospered because, like its neighbor Virginia, its economy was based on tobacco. Lord Baltimore would have preferred an exclusively Catholic colony. However, from the outset, there was a mixture of Catholic and Protestant settlers in Maryland. As the colony grew, the Protestant settlers began to outnumber the Catholic colonists, and the Protestant majority threatened to restrict the rights of Catholics. In 1649, Lord Baltimore agreed to the Act of Toleration, which guaranteed freedom of religion to anyone professing to believe in Jesus Christ. So all Christian-dominated religion were tolerated. This act helped to ensure Catholic safety in Maryland. When the colonial era ended, Maryland sheltered more Roman Catholics than any other English-speaking colony. Okay, we are not even close. Hold on. In 1642, the English Civil War between Calvinist and Anglican royalists broke out when the English Parliament, led by a Puritan named Oliver Cromwell, rebelled against King Charles I. They ultimately executed Charles, and Cromwell assumed control of the government until his death in 1660. After years of civil war, royalists restored the monarchy, and Charles II became king. These events had major consequences for the colonies. Colonization has been interrupted during this unrest and during the reign of Charles II. So, colonization efforts in the New World by England was halted during these conflicts and during the reigns of Charles II, leading colonization efforts to be delayed, if not stopped completely. This is called the Restoration period. Unlike the investors in the joint stock companies who established Virginia and New England, Charles II preferred using individual proprietors such as the Duke of York and Lord Calvert to establish and run colonies. These settlements eventually became royal colonies, functioning under official governors appointed by the crown. For example, Charles II granted Carolina to 8 of his allies, who became Lord Proprietors of the region. The proprietors set out from London with about 100 English settlers. On their way to Carolina, they stopped at the English colony of Bermuda and Barbados to pick up more experienced settlers. British settlements in the Caribbean, so we are talking about British settlements in the Caribbean, called the West Indies, included island colonies such as Barbados and Antigua and Jamaica. Jamaica is where my parents got married, in case you were wondering. Probably weren't. That dated back to the early 1600s. So colonization efforts in the Caribbean for the English dated back a long time ago. The settlers' background caused the Carolinas to develop strong economic and cultural ties to the Caribbean until the time of the American Revolution. So this help from the Caribbeans bolstered the Carolinas' economy. Okay. The first settlers arrived in Carolina in 1670 with hopes of growing sugarcane and exporting non-English products like wine, silk, and olive oil. None of these plans were successful, and it was 2 decades before the settlers found a stable crop. Rice emerged as the principal export crop for the colony in the 1690s. Carolinian colonists began paying a premium price for West African slaves who had experience in rice cultivation. By 1710, the Africans made up a large population in Carolina. Dense forests also brought revenue with the lumber, tar, and resin from the pine trees providing some of the best shipbuilding materials in the world. North and South Carolina also produced and exported indigo, a blue dye obtained from native plants which was used in coloring fabric. Charlestown, now Charleston, was founded in 1680 and became the leading port and trading center of the South. The city had a diverse compilation field with various cultures settling there, including French Protestants, refugees, and sons of English aristocrats. The northern region of Carolina was neglected from the outset because the English aristocrat proprietors tolerated the region as a refuge for the outcast of Virginia. The Virginians created a remote center called the Albemarle District, just south of the Virginia border. In contrast to the sophistication of Charleston, with its English proprietary and ties to Caribbean plantations, North Carolina developed distinctive traits such as a strong resistance to authority, being hospitable to pirates, and impious behavior. Due to friction between the governors, North and South Carolina were officially separated into 2 colonies in 1712. Subsequently, each settlement became a royal colony. So, the governors between South and North Carolina were seen as hostile towards each other, so the governor decided to split them both up, but they both had a royal colony title, and they basically both had equal economies, manufacturing when it comes to lumber, shipbuilding, all that. Just south of the Carolinas, Georgia was founded in 1733 by a group of loyal London philanthropists. This was 126 years after the first colony, Virginia, was founded, and 52 years after the 12th colony, Pennsylvania, was founded. Georgia was set up for 2 primary reasons: as a military buffer against Spanish forces in Florida, Because remember, French, Spanish, England all came over to the New World to dominate the New World. So England was afraid, so they set up Georgia as a military buffer and as a social experiment. Alright. A group of London philanthropists were concerned with the plight of honest persons who were imprisoned for debt. Their leader, George James Oglethorpe, became interested in prison reform after a friend died in debtor's jail. Oglethorpe had a military background and was able to successfully repel Spanish attacks. As a buffer against Florida, the colony was considered a success. However, as philanthropic endeavor, the colony was not as successful. The founders' goal was to populate the colony with upstanding industrious farmers. To perpetrate this goal, land grants were limited to small plots. Rum and other spirits were banned, and slavery was prohibited. However, the settlers quickly found ways to circumvent these restrictions, and Georgia developed an economy much like South Carolina's. In 1752, the philanthropists, disillusioned, abandoned their responsibilities. Hold on, guys. Their responsibilities, and the settlement of Georgia became a royal colony. Georgia continued to grow very slowly, and at the end of the colonial era was the least populous of the colonies. Almost done. The British southern colonies of Georgia and the Carolinas and the Chesapeake colonies of Maryland and Virginia shared several distinct features that also tied them to the developing British colonies of the Caribbean. The plantation lifestyle they created, in which wealthy planters owned large amounts of land with slaves or servants as labor, helped the colonies survive in the New World. The colonists developed large estates and exported agricultural products, primarily tobacco and rice. Slaves could be found throughout all of the southern colonies during this time. In contrast to the small towns of New England and the cities of the Middle Atlantic, the character of the South was ruled from the outset. Outside of Charleston and a few cities on the coast, there were few urban settlements. Official business, worship, and trade often took place as isolated courthouses or churches located at the intersection of roads. So this geography will be the reason further down the lines the South will build up an agricultural based economy as we go into early America and throughout history, and the North will build a industrial economy. The plantation economy was the South's greatest asset and greatest weakness. Disparities of wealth and intolerance occurred in all of the southern colonies. In the South, the plantation system created a society divided by class and race. The decentralized rural patterns allowed individual landowners to have great autonomy and influence, but also hampered the region's ability to come together in times of crises. The agricultural crops brought great wealth, but at the expense of being dependent on international markets and reliant on the import of manufactured goods. Additionally, the settlers' overplanting of tobacco resulted in a need for more land. As the colonies expanded, the settlers had to confront North Americans. So we already are seeing this conflict arise from the from the colonies encroaching on Indian lands, and that will be important as we go from here to the French and Indian War. So next time, tomorrow's video is gonna be colonial life and scientific and religious transformation. We'll discuss those topic outlines tomorrow. See you guys then. Hope you join me.